Specialized vehicles are required for specialized tasks. But what happens when those tasks are either complete or don't need to be done anymore? Sadly, the usual answer to that question is that the amazing vehicles created to perform the tasks are either scrapped or forgotten about. We're not about to let that happen, though. Instead of forgetting about all these incredible technical vehicles, we're going to tell those stories to you in this video. When a colossal ship runs aground and can't be moved, it presents a problem. The people who own it have to decide whether its scrap value is sufficient to justify the cost of salvaging it or breaking it apart. And if it isn't, the ship usually becomes abandoned. That's the story of the SS Kyle, which ran aground at Harbor Grace in Canada years ago and is still there today. This steamer, which is more than 200 feet long, played a vital and specialized role in both World Wars after launching in 1913, ferrying troops and supplies to wherever they needed to go. It survived the war and continued performing shipping duties until 1967, when it broke free from its moorings during a storm and was carried to the harbor where it became stuck fast. Since then, several people have bought the derelict ship with the intention of removing or converting it, but none of their plans have ever come to fruition. Even now, there's talk of turning it into a museum ship, but it's rotting away piece by piece, and the wreck becomes more dangerous with every passing year. The city of Thessaloniki in Greece is a modern and thriving one, but traces of Greece's transport past hide on the outskirts of the city in a makeshift train cemetery, where thousands of engines and carriages are rotting away, exposed to the elements. The country's Hellenic Railways organization, which nominally still owns all of the vehicles here, tows them to this site when they're decommissioned for safekeeping. In reality, that safekeeping is actually just abandonment. The 10 tracks are now full to capacity, and unwanted and disused trains which have deteriorated so badly that they're not even thought to have scrap value anymore. The oldest trains in the collection have been on site since the 1980s, and anything valuable that might have been aboard them has long since been broken off and stolen by thieves. The only visitors to the site these days are urban explorers who've taken many pictures and videos of trains that have broken down so severely that weeds and plants go straight through them in many cases. If the two old hovercraft hiding out at a bankrupt museum in Hampshire, England have a future, it will be because of a fundraiser that's currently trying to save them and preserve them for future generations. They're not looking their best now, but they were once used to cross the English Channel between the UK and France, and in their era were known as the Concords of the Sea. Named Princess Margaret and Princess Anne in honor of the British royals, they were thought to be the last surviving vehicles of their class. During the 1970s, they represented a luxury form of transport that could ferry passengers from Britain to Europe in record time. But since the creation of the Channel Tunnel Railway line, they've become obsolete. After the owner of the museum forfeited his land and assets due to bankruptcy, the government took ownership of them and now wants to use the land for redevelopment. That would leave the hovercrafts without a home, so they'd likely be broken up for scrap. Externally, they're battered and worn, but the interiors are in surprisingly good condition. Hopefully someone, somewhere, can provide them with a future. In the early 1960s, the USSR wanted to find a better way of transporting goods and cargo across the remote northern regions of its territory, where there were few railway lines and conventional cars and trucks struggled to cross the treacherous terrain. The solution to that problem ought to have been the ZIL E-167, powered by two enormous engines at the rear of the vehicle and featuring giant, hard-wearing wheels that could cross swampland and frozen land with no difficulties. Ingeniously for the time, the cab's body was made of fiberglass, which kept the weight of the vehicle down and made it light enough to cross boggy land without sinking or becoming stuck. Unfortunately for the people who invented it, by the time they'd finished the job, someone had already come up with the GTT Universal Tracked All-Terrain Vehicle, and the ZIL E-167 was immediately obsolete. Now the sole unit of the unwanted vehicle is rotting away somewhere, surrounded by spare tires and wheels that it never used and will never need. It looks like a sturdy vehicle, and it's a shame that it couldn't have been given to a farmer somewhere. Surely they would have been able to find a use for it. Abandoned Soviet-era vehicles aren't a rarity in Russia or any of the former Soviet states. Here we find a whole fleet of abandoned MAZ trucks in Kaliningrad, and some which are painted with military color schemes, but were never entered into military service. The vehicles are inside a scrapyard that belongs to the military and contains rolling stock and supplies that date back to the time of the Second World War, including a pair of Soviet Katyusha rocket launchers. Based on their appearance, it looks like the trucks were brought here and lined up deliberately for storage, some of them even mounted on plinths, but then forgotten about as the years passed by. While some of them are clearly beyond the point of use, there are a few MAZ 535 units that look like they could still be driven away if anyone could clear the space and locate the keys. The site is patrolled by armed troops, so urban explorers are advised to avoid getting too close, but we have to wonder why this aging equipment is being guarded if it no longer serves a purpose. If you've seen a Cessna 160 aircraft out there somewhere in the world, please contact a plane dealer immediately. It's unbelievably valuable. But what's left of it was last seen for sale on eBay in 2012 by someone who clearly had no idea of the rarity of what they were selling. This American-built prototype light aircraft was completed in 1962, as the only one of its class ever built. At the time, the Cessna company thought that making a cheaper version of its popular Cessna 172 would be a business winner. So they came up with this four-seated, single-engine, high-winged monoplane as an attempt to fill what they thought was a gap in the market. At the time, it had a projected retail price of a little under $8,500. Imagine buying a plane for that price today. Unfortunately, the costs of producing the aircraft after working hours were factored in proved to be higher than its value, so the project was discontinued after the prototype was built and the unit was sent for scrap. It was never scrapped, though, and it's known to be in private hands somewhere. We just don't know where. The reason that car enthusiasts get so excited about looking for so-called barn finds is that you never know what might turn up next. They'll often find nothing but a useless old heap of junk, but occasionally a real gem emerges from hiding, like this Depression-era Hudson 1936 Terraplane pickup. It's one of only 1,901 ever built, and it's been spending its time in dry storage in Billings, Montana, USA, until it was offered for sale on Craigslist in June 2020. The Great Depression in the USA of the 1930s had a significant impact on car sales. So this vehicle was Hudson's attempt to build a cheaper car that the average American family could still afford to buy. The name implies that it might be able to fly, but it was actually just an attempt to capitalize on the public's fascination with planes. Although the thick layers of rust on the car will challenge anybody looking to restore it, it's thought that all of the original components of the 80-year-old vehicle are still there, including the notorious suicide doors. No other pickup ever invented is thought to have had dangerous doors like this. In 2006, a giant American aircraft carrier was fired upon and sunk in the Gulf of Mexico. This was no attack by enemy forces, though. It was the official retirement and scuttling of the 900-foot-long USS Oriskany, and the beginning of its new life as an artificial reef below the waves. Destroying a ship this enormous is no easy task. It took 500 pounds of plastic explosives to blow a large enough hole to allow it to sink, and even then it took over half an hour to go down. As it went down, veterans of the vessel wept and applauded. This was once a distinguished warship, seeing action in the Korean War and the Vietnam War, during which former U.S. presidential candidate John McCain was among its crew. Sinking a ship like this is a costly endeavor. It's thought to have cost around $20 million to get the job done, although it's hoped that it'll now provide a safe environment for marine life for many years to come. It isn't really lost, it's just changed jobs. You'd look twice at a Western Clipper motorhome if one passed you on the roads of America. We can't think of many vehicles that look anything like them. The curved design of the motorhome's body is styled after a Zeppelin and represents the fascination that the public had with airships during the 1930s. This particular unit was built in 1937. Despite being called a motorhome, the lack of space meant that this vehicle wasn't a vehicle that anyone expected to live in full-time. Instead, they were designed by Brooks Stevens of Racine, Wisconsin, as mobile sales offices for salespeople who spent much of their time on roads going from city to city in pursuit of business. Nobody knows how many units were built, but very few remain in one piece today. Even this well-preserved example has been modified over the years. It comes with a Chevrolet small block 327 V8 engine, and that wasn't invented until the 1960s. We're not sure anyone would want to sleep inside it these days, but it's still an interesting piece of American history. There are very few roads in the world where it's legal for a car to reach 200 miles per hour, and very few cars that are capable of such a speed even in the modern era. Could this aluminum Austin Healey racer have been capable of the job several decades ago? Sadly, the full history of the vehicle isn't known, but the stickers on its body suggest that it raced at Bonneville Salt Flats in 1960, and one of those stickers boldly proclaims it to be a member of the Grant 200 Miles Per Hour Club. Looking at its long, curved body, it was clearly built for speed. Without documentation, it's hard to put a date on the whole vehicle, but elements of the chassis suggest an early 1950s build, so it may have been modified several times before it allegedly reached that incredible speed. The Chevy-powered engine inside it isn't running today, but back when it was, it would have provided some serious thrust and speed. Between that and the lightweight body, did it really crack the 200 mile per hour mark, or is the sticker just a sticker? Now it's been classified as a barn find. Maybe someone could buy it, restore it, and then let us know when they get the engine running. During the 1950s, someone at General Motors had what they thought at the time was a great idea. At the time, the company's electromotive division built engines for trains. The business was going well, but GM thought they could go a step further. Instead of just making the engines, why didn't they start building and selling whole trains? After all, they had experience building bus bodies, and a train is really just a large bus on rails. Almost as soon as they had the idea, the company took some old aluminum bus bodies, put their train engines in, and created what they thought was a revolutionary, cheap train that would become the future of rail transportation in America. They called it the General Motors Aerotrain. Sadly for them, their lack of train expertise showed them up badly. They sold 2 units of the train in 1956 and had to take both of them back months later. The lack of suspension made them hard to drive and uncomfortable to travel in, and their lack of weight saw them struggle to generate the momentum to get up hills reliably. GM gave up on the idea, and both trains are now in museums. In theory, the Fordson Snow Devil was a great invention. In practice, it turned out to be a nightmare. Designed to safely carry human passengers through ice and snowy terrain, this 1920s invention was basically a tractor with its wheels removed. In the space where the wheels used to be, 2 enormous rotating steel screws were fitted. The idea was that the engine would turn the screws, and the screws would grip the terrain to pull the vehicle through it. Fordson tested the vehicle with a human passenger and found it worked well. But they inexplicably failed to carry out any test that involved hauling heavy cargo. When 3 units were sold to a haulage company in Alaska in 1926, all of them suffered mechanical failures while dragging tons of weight behind them. Fordson was forced to concede that the Snow Devil didn't work when that much weight was factored into the equation, and the idea was reluctantly abandoned. The buyers got a full refund, and Fordson presumably never tried again to sell a vehicle that hadn't been tested in the field. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.